an ex-atheist, I'm now a Christian. I'm telling you, I've never got even one reason why I should believe that God does not exist. But there's actually about 60, 70 reasons I could go right off the top of my head of why we should believe God exists. But let's start. I'm going to go through 4 major reasons. So the question of give us some reasons why God does not exist, we'll have to leave that up to atheists. Now, atheists have been trying for centuries to disprove God's existence, and they haven't been able to do it. No one's ever been able to come up with a convincing argument. So rather than attack straw men at this point, we can let the atheist present their arguments why we should believe God does not exist. And we've debated over 32 atheists. All of them lost the debate. They brought up unicorns, Santa Claus, leprechauns, teapots, but they had no good reasons to believe that God exists. They did, however, prove that atheism is madness. So let's move on to the main question. Are there good reasons to think that God does exist? Let's go through some reasons why I think that God exists. And whole books have been written on each one of these. So all I can present here tonight, guys, is a brief sketch of each argument and then go into more detail. Number one, and this is most important, these reasons are independent of one another. So what that means, even if one of them is sound and rational and a deductive argument and plausible, it furnishes good reasons for believing that God exists. But taken together, they constitute even a more powerful cumulative case that God exists. So number one, God makes sense of the origin of the universe. Have you guys ever asked yourself where the universe came from and why everything exists instead of just nothing? Now, it used to be that atheists have said that the universe is eternal. They actually used to say that. And in all honesty, science in the past did believe that the universe was eternal. But the Christian theists have always claimed that the universe had a beginning. Now science has vindicated Christian theism, and science now backs up the Christians' claim that the universe did have a beginning, and it has now put atheism's back against the wall, because typically atheists have said that the universe is eternal. Now they've got a problem, because this doesn't make sense. Think about it for a moment. If the universe never began to exist, then that means the number of events in the past history of our universe is infinite. But mathematicians recognize that the idea of an actually infinite number of things leads to self-contradictions. Here's another example. Here's a math question for you guys. What is infinity minus infinity? Well, mathematically, you'll get self-contradictory answers. So this shows that infinity is really just an idea in your mind. It's not really something that exists in reality. David Hilbert, one of the greatest mathematicians of our time, stated, quote, "The infinite is nowhere to be found in reality. It neither exists in nature nor does it provide a legitimate basis for rational thought. The role that remains for the infinite to play is solely that of an idea," unquote. But that entails, however, that since past events are not just ideas but are real, that the number of past events must be finite. Therefore, the series of past events cannot just go back forever. They can't. Rather, the universe must have begun to exist. Now, this conclusion has been confirmed by remarkable discoveries in astronomy and astrophysics. The astrophysical evidence indicates that the universe began to exist in a great explosion they call the Big Bang. Now, I will concede that everyone disagrees with how old the universe is and all this, but what everyone does agree on, and most scientists agree with this, is that physical space and time were created in that event, as well as all matter and energy in the universe. Therefore, as Cambridge astronomer Fred Hoyle points out, the Big Bang requires the creation of the universe from nothing. This is because as you go back in time, you reach a point in time at which, in Hoyle's words, the universe was, quote, shrunk down to nothing at all, unquote. Thus, what the Big Bang model requires is that the universe began to exist and was created out of nothing. Now, now this gets very awkward for the atheist, for as Anthony Kinney of Oxford University urges, he says, look, a proponent of the Big Bang, if he's an atheist, he must believe that the universe came from nothing and by nothing. But surely this doesn't make sense, guys. Out of nothing, nothing comes. Out of nothing, nothing comes. So then why does the universe exist instead of just nothing, and where did it come from? Obviously, there must have been a cause which brought the universe into being. Now, follow along here. This gets pretty heavy with this science here. From the very nature of the case, the cause must be an uncaused, because remember, we can't have an infinite regress, changeless, timeless, and immaterial being which created the universe. Because remember, all matter, space, time, and even energy were not even pre-existent before the Big Bang. It must be uncaused because there cannot be an infinite regress of causes. It must be timeless and therefore changeless, at least without the universe, because it created time. Because it also created space, it must transcend space as well and therefore be immaterial and not physical. Now, moreover, I would argue that it must absolutely be personal. For how else could a timeless cause give rise to a temporal effect like the universe? If the cause were an impersonal set of sufficient conditions, then the cause could never exist without the effect, you see. If the sufficient conditions were timelessly present, then the effect would be timelessly present as well. So the only way for the cause to be timeless, but for the effect to begin in time, is if the cause is a personal agent who freely chooses to create an effect in time without any prior determining conditions. And thus, we are brought rationally and plausibly, not merely to the transcendent cause of the universe, but to its personal creator. Now, here's the argument. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. This cause must be uncaused, changeless, timeless, and personal. Now, I think, excuse me, I think as an ex-atheist, now Christian, that it is incredible that science and this Big Bang fits in perfectly with what the Christian theist has always believed, that in the beginning God created the universe. Now, I put it to you guys, which do you think makes more sense? That the Christian theist is right, or that the universe just popped into being uncaused out of nothing? I at least have no trouble assessing these alternatives. Why even to ask that question is to answer it. Number two, God makes sense of the complex order in the universe. Now, during the last 30 years or so, scientists have discovered that the existence of intelligent life depends upon a delicate and complex balance of initial conditions. It's miraculous, guys. These conditions are simply given in the Big Bang itself. We now know that life-prohibiting universes are vastly more probable than any life-permitting universes like ours. How much more probable? Well, the answer is that the chances that the universe should be life-permitting are so infinitesimal as to be incomprehensible and incalculable. We are literally living on a razor's edge. For example, Stephen Hawking has estimated that if the rate of the universe's expansion just 1 second after the Big Bang had been smaller by even 1 part in 100,000 million, the universe would have recollapsed into a hot fireball. And PCW Davies has calculated that the odds against the initial conditions being suitable for star formation, without which, by the way, planets could not exist, is 1 followed by 1,000 billion zeros at least. He also estimates that a change in the strength of gravity or of the weak force by only 1 part, get this, in 10 raised to the 100th power would have prevented a life-permitting universe. Now, this is what's amazing, guys. It's not just that one of these constants are fine-tuned. That would be miraculous in itself. There's around 50 such constants and quantities that are fine-tuned not by chance and not by natural law. 50 of these constants and quantities that are present in the Big Bang, which must be fine-tuned in this way if the universe is to permit life. Clearly, this reeks of intelligent design. This is not dumb luck or natural law. Let's go through the reasons why. The only 3 reasons these constants are this way is either dumb luck, like chance, or natural law, or design. Let's see which choice is more plausible. It cannot be chance or physical necessity, natural law, and here's why. Because it's not that each quantity just needs to be fine-tuned. You sitting down, guys, their ratios to each other must also be exquisitely fine-tuned. So you get improbability is multiplied by improbability, by improbability, by improbability again, until your minds are just reeling in incomprehensible numbers, and you can say this definitely is not dumb luck or chance. Now, well, what about something in natural law? It can't be natural law because there is no physical reason why these constants and quantities should possess the values they do. The one-time agnostic Paul Davies comments, "Through my scientific work, I have come to believe more and more strongly that the physical universe is put together with an ingenuity so astonishing that I cannot accept it merely as a brute fact." Similarly, Fred Hoyle remarks, "A common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics." And Robert Jastrow, this guy's the head of NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies, he calls this the most powerful evidence for the existence of God ever to come out of science. So once again, the view that Christian theists have always held, that there is an intelligent designer of the universe, obviously makes much more sense than the atheistic interpretation that the universe, when it popped into being uncaused out of nothing, just happened to be by chance fine-tuned for intelligent life with an incomprehensible precision and delicacy. There's not enough time for even random chance. Now let's go to our final arguments on this. The fine-tuning for life is therefore plausibly not due to chance, neither is it due to physical necessity, natural law. Therefore, it is due to design. Random chance is an inadequate explanation also for intelligent life. Number 3, God makes sense of objective moral values in the world. I have this argument, and then we have one more. If God does not exist, then objective moral values do not exist. Now, many theists and atheists agree on this point. For example, J.L. Mackie, he was an atheist. He's dead now, so I'll say the late J.L. Mackie of Oxford University. He was one of the most influential atheists of our time. He admitted it, guys. He said, quote, "If there are objective values, they make the existence of God more probable than it would have been without them." Unquote. So we have a defensible argument from morality to the existence of God. But in order to avoid God's existence, Mackie therefore denied that objective moral values exist. He wrote, quote, It is easy to explain this moral sense as a natural product of biological and social evolution, unquote. And Professor Michael Ruse, a philosopher of science at the University of Guelph, agrees. He explains, quote, morality is a biological adaptation no less than our hands and feet and teeth. Considered as a rationally justifiable set of claims about an objective something, ethics is illusory, he says. I appreciate that when somebody says, love thy neighbor as thyself, they think that they are referring above and beyond themselves. Nevertheless, such reference is truly without foundation. Morality is just an aid to survival and reproduction, and any deeper meaning is illusory, unquote. Friedrich Nietzsche, the great atheist of the last century who proclaimed the death of God, understood that the death of God meant the destruction of all meaning and value in life. I think that Friedrich Nietzsche was right, but we got to be careful here, guys. Here's the question. The question here is not, must we believe in God and worship God in order to do moral things or to understand morality? I'm not claiming that we must, nor is the question, can we recognize objective moral values without following God or worshiping God? I think we can. Rather, here's the question. If God does not exist, do objective moral values exist? And like Mackey and Ruse, I just don't see any reason to think that in the absence of God, the morality evolved by Homo sapiens is objective. After all, if there is no God, then what's so special about human beings? The atheist will tell you that they're just accidental byproducts of nature. That's what they believe, which have evolved relatively recently on an infinitesimal speck of dust lost somewhere in a hostile and mindless universe, and which are doomed to perish individually and collectively anyways. So on the atheistic view, some actions, say rape, may not be socially advantageous, and so in the course of human development has become taboo. But that does absolutely nothing to prove that rape is really wrong. See, the problem on atheism is on the atheistic view, there's nothing really wrong with your raping someone on the atheistic view. Thus, without God, there is no absolute right and wrong which imposes itself on our conscience. But in the real world that we live in, the real world, we know deep down inside and we sense objective moral values do exist. The problem is that objective moral values do exist, and deep down we all know it. The man that says rape is okay and there's nothing wrong with it is just as wrong as the man that says 2 + 2 = 5. And there's no more reason to deny the objective reality of moral values than the objective reality of the physical world. Look, actions like rape, torture, and child abuse aren't just socially subjective, unacceptable behavior. They're evil. They're moral abominations. Some things, at least, are really wrong. Likewise, love, equality, and self-sacrifice are really good. But if objective values cannot exist without God, and it's obvious that objective values do exist, then it follows logically and inescapably that God exists. See, on atheism, we would have to accept people like Jeffrey Dahmer that believe it's okay to eat people and put them in the refrigerator. On atheism, we would have to accept that what the Nazis did was not evil, but subjective and good. And on atheism, they just believe they're animals anyways, so who are they to say that they have the right to kill other animals or eat other animals? Aren't they guilty of speciesism then? Think about it. If there is no absolute moral standard, then one cannot say in a final sense that anything is right or wrong. One last argument here. So to sum up the objective morality argument, if God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist. However, objective moral values do exist. Therefore, we arrive at the conclusion logically, plausibly, and inescapably that God exists. Premise 4, God makes sense of the historical facts concerning the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. This historical person, Jesus of Nazareth, was a remarkable individual. And these New Testament critics have reached something of a consensus that this historical Jesus came onto the scene with an unprecedented sense of divine authority, the authority to stand and speak in God's place. Now, that's why the Jewish leadership instigated his crucifixion for the charge of blasphemy. He claimed that in himself the kingdom of God had come, and as visible demonstrations of this fact, he carried out a ministry of miracle working and exorcisms. But the supreme confirmation of his claim was his resurrection from the dead. If Jesus did rise from the dead, and as an ex-atheist, and I'm now a Christian, I believe he did, based on proof, evidence, and rational thought, and a deductive argument, and history, etc. Let's go through it. But if Jesus did rise from the dead, then it would seem that we have a divine miracle on our hands, and thus more evidence for the existence of God. The arguments that I'm going to give you here have explanatory scope, explanatory power. They're plausible. They're not ad hoc or contrived like the atheist arguments of the spaghetti monster or leprechaun. They're in accord with accepted beliefs, and they're better than rival theories such as Jesus wasn't really dead or the hallucination theory. Fact 1. On the Sunday following his crucifixion, Jesus' tomb was found empty by a group of his women followers. According to Jakob Kramer, an Austrian scholar, this guy specializes in the study of the resurrection. He says, quote, by far most scholars hold firmly to the reliability of the biblical statements about the empty tomb, unquote. According to the New Testament critic D.H. Van Dalen, he says it is extremely difficult to object to the empty tomb on historical grounds. Those who deny it do so on the basis of theological or philosophical assumptions. Fact 2, on separate occasions, different individuals and groups saw appearances of Jesus alive after his death. According to the prominent skeptical German New Testament critic Gert Ludemann, he says, quote, it may be taken as historically certain that the disciples had experiences after Jesus' death in which Jesus appeared to them as the risen Christ. And that guy that just said that was an atheist. He says these appearances were witnessed not only by believers but also by unbelievers, skeptics, and even enemies. Fact 3, the original disciples suddenly came to believe in the resurrection of Jesus despite having every predisposition to the contrary. Look, guys, at that time, the Jews had no belief in a dying, much less a rising Messiah. And the Jewish beliefs about the afterlife precluded anyone's rising from the dead prior to the end of the world, otherwise known as the general resurrection. There's another brilliant New Testament scholar, Luke Johnson at Emory University. He says, some sort of powerful, transformative experience is required to generate the sort of movement earliest Christianity was. And for those British, those of you that are our British friends, N.T. Wright, he's an eminent British scholar, he says, that is why as a historian I cannot explain the rise of early Christianity unless Jesus rose again, leaving an empty tomb behind him. Therefore, it seems to me as an ex-atheist, now a believer in God, a Christian theist, I believe that I am amply justified in believing that Jesus rose from the dead and was who he claimed to be. But that also entails God exists. Now, before we wrap it up, let me just spend one more moment here, and I want to go through some major problems that atheism has. Do you know that history shows that atheism is responsible for over 200 million murders, brutal rapes, and genocide under the atheist regimes of Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, Kim Jong-il, the Khmer Rouge, and more than Christianity ever could do? Do you know that as an ex-atheist, now Christian, a lot of atheists will say, well, what about the Inquisition? Look, the Inquisition was over a 3-century time period, over 3 centuries. Do you know that the atheist regimes murdered more people in a week than the Inquisition could do over a 3-century time period? So when you think of atheism, think of genocide. In fact, atheism's horrible reputation and evils in society are so well known that even Dr. Sam Harris and Frederick Rice agree on this. They both agree that atheism has a stigma to it. Dr. Sam Harris, for example, has advocated that atheists no longer call themselves atheists. Are you sitting down, my atheist friends? You know what Dr. Sam Harris said? He said, concerning the label of atheist, quote, it's right next to child molester as a designation. Friends don't let friends become atheists, guys. Recent studies also show due to the evil of the atheism movement in society, atheists are now officially the least trusted group in society. A survey done right after 9/11 said that atheists were the least trusted group in society. They're on the very bottom list of people that were trusted. Now, as a Christian, we also know that not only is atheism extremely anti-Christ, but it also can be hazardous to your health. Studies show atheists have one of, if not the highest suicide rate in society. In my homework for like my radio shows and stuff, I also found the following facts at Wikipedia. If you go to their atheism page, it says, on the contrary, one of the most common criticisms of atheism is that denying the existence of a God leads to moral relativism, leaving one with no moral or ethical foundation or renders life meaningless and miserable. Now, my last comment is, look, even on the atheist worldview themselves, they admit that it ends in death. They admit it. They believe that everything's going to die anyways. There is no eternal life. The universe is going to die out. So when it comes to atheism, there is no objective purpose for an atheist. Their purposes have to be subjective. Can you guys see why I left atheism? And I'll just end with a quote from Jesus Christ when he says, look, those that are in sin, those that have sin, they're a slave to their sin. If you're an atheist, leave the slavery of atheism. Do what Jesus Christ said when he said, but when the Son of Man sets you free, you are free indeed. And guys, as an ex-atheist, now Christian, it is awesome to be free. God bless you guys. Thanks for listening. I'll open up the chat. And if you guys want that PowerPoint presentation, let me know, and I'll send it on out to you.